Today I'm going to talk about this documentary about the Grateful Dead. It's called Long Strange Trip, the Untold Story of the Grateful Dead. So I think it's more a documentary on the life of Jerry Garcia, but because he sort of was the center point where everything revolved around, the band really revolved around Jerry Garcia. So it goes into his early influences. He saw Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein at an early age, around age 6. His father had passed away, and he sort of saw the weird in life, and he thought, "Oh, this is really neat." And he started drawing Frankenstein sort of drawings and stuff. And he started playing banjo in the coffee houses and whatnot, and bluegrass actually. And it started to become a little restrictive, so he changed to electric guitar, and that's when things started to open up, and the freedom of the music, the flow of the music, the moment, playing in the moment. And the Grateful Dead can be called true American music, which some people categorize it as, because it had R&B, bluegrass influences, folk, blues, and avant-garde. They finally met Ken Kesey and the acid tests. And of course LSD opened up a lot of things for the Dead. They played, they were the soundtrack for the Ken Kesey Merry Pranksters thing that was going on, the acid tests. And they could play whatever they wanted, because they weren't getting paid. And they could play when they wanted, and if they didn't want to play, they wouldn't, and sometimes they were probably a little too that way and couldn't play. So acid became a real influential thing on their way of playing and their way of life. And there's a lot of unseen footage here of them playing the acid tests and whatnot, and it's really fascinating, of course. And they all moved into a house eventually on the Haight-Ashbury, and they could play and practice, and there's scenes here of them in the house talking about their philosophy and all that stuff. So there was a collective improvisation was sort of the main part of their playing. Jerry had no desire to be famous. He didn't want to be a leader. He just wanted to have fun and play music. And that's basically what he did for most of his life. Somewhere in the, right after the disastrous Altamont concert, Sam Cutler, who was the Rolling Stones road manager the year before, he became their manager. He told them, "You know, you guys, you can make money playing this music." So he tried to set him up. He's interviewed throughout this, and his opinion really holds a lot of weight, because he saw firsthand what direction they were taking and whatnot, and it was pretty destructive in a lot of senses. They never really wanted to become famous at the beginning. So eventually they moved out to the country and decided that their music had to change, that their vocals became more, they practiced vocalizing and, you know, harmonizing. Before that, there's a funny scene, I think, is where they were in the studio around Anthem of the Sun and stuff, and they wanted to go out into the desert and film the air in the desert, and then film the air, or not film, but sound, record the sound of the desert and the sound of the city, mix them together, and make that as the sort of the soundtrack to improvise over, whatever. So then when they went to the country, they started to get influenced by country music, and Working Men's Dead as a result of that, and also American Beauty, 2 great albums. There's some funny scenes here where they played the Playboy After Dark Club, and they laced the coffee with LSD, of course. And what was sort of a static kind of environment, all set up in a studio and everything, became a real party, Jerry said. Everybody was grooving out and stoned on LSD, and there's a few little clips of that in there. So that was pretty funny. But along the way, Jerry really sabotaged them being famous, or him wanting to be famous. He was interviewed a little bit into this, but he didn't ever want to be interviewed and talk about things, and the dog's barking as usual. He wanted to be, just wanted to have fun. And this kind of showed up eventually. And in about '74, Sam Cutler quit, and the band did a final Winterland concert, series of concerts that, of course, they were going to take a break. But Jerry never took a break. He kept right on playing. And that sort of, in the end, it became, he never stopped. And that was sort of part of his sort of path to destruction, really, because he just kept going and going and going. And he never took that time off to really, to breathe, sort of thing. So Bob Weir's lyricist is interviewed quite a bit through here, and he said the Grateful Dead were a very dysfunctional family. They just kind of, I mean, the drugs and the whole way they lived was really, in the end, kind of wearing them down. So Pigpen, who was their keyboard player, and they were pretty well the singer at the beginning, he had a real blues scent. He was an alcoholic, and they were acid heads and whatnots. And of course, after a while, he sort of got shoved to the side, and he eventually died of alcoholism, which is a real sad story. So there's some aspects of this film where they show the roadie side of things. I mean, everybody gets interviewed somewhere along this film, and it becomes really almost tragic in a lot of ways. Like when they get into Deadheads, it becomes in the '80s where they sort of became famous, really famous, with Touch of Grey and whatnot. People started showing up just to party, and everything sort of became chaotic. And Jerry didn't really want to have anything to do with being an authoritarian. He just, whatever happens, happens. If they come here to party, they come here to party. So at some point, I got a book on Owsley here, and he provided the Grateful Dead with the best grade of acid, and originally too. And he also designed their massive sound stage or sound PA, which was 500 speakers, and the trying to take it from one gig to another gig almost became impossible. The setup time and everything, but they had this massive sound, and he wanted a sound system that could be heard a mile away. The Bear. So that's a book on him. And at some point, the drugs were starting to really take their toll. I think somewhere along the line here, Jerry started doing heroin, and things became kind of dark with everybody just, it was just everybody going in this downward path because of drugs and alcohol too. So there was nobody in charge after Sam Cutler left. It sort of became real chaotic for sure. But they did a tour of Europe when they came back to play, and it was kind of a disaster. But they had the sound system with them, and everything just went crazy. It was like there's scenes from this, people taking drugs and whatnot, and it gets a little hairy. You just can't imagine yourself in that situation, because it was so detrimental to everybody's health for sure. When Touch of Grey became a big song, it really shot the band up to a whole new dimension. It was just sort of a mania almost to see the Grateful Dead. The parking lots were full of people, and Jerry became very isolated and into himself and heroin and whatnot, and he eventually had a coma, and he came out of that, and he had some brief periods of not doing drugs, but he always went back to the heroin. So his whole thing for the band's sake was to keep on playing. The band wanted to keep on playing because they had like 50 people to support, and he was in the middle of it, and he couldn't really get out of it. He was stuck there, and some of the footage of him playing near the end is really, really sad. You can see him just going totally downhill. He's just not into playing very much anymore, and eventually took its toll. So this film, I think, is really more about Garcia than it is. Well, I mean, it's about the Grateful Dead, but it's more about Jerry Garcia's rise and then his sort of downfall, because, like I said before, everything revolved around him. When he was going, the band went. When they weren't going, when he wasn't going, there just was nothing there. So some of this film it's 3.5 hours long, so some of it gets a little tedious when they get into the Deadheads, which is interesting, but there's one guy on there, they have on way too much. His interviews are through the thing, and I don't know, he was a writer or whatever he was. He just became a little obnoxious after a while. I didn't really get off on that. So they probably could have cut it down, but this isn't the definitive documentary on the Grateful Dead. I think to do that, I don't know if they can do it at this point, because all the band members were interviewed here, and I'm sure they're probably not wanting to be just talk about this over and over and over again. So I would recommend this, but you know, it's a long trip to watch this thing, 3.5 hours, and I watched it all last night for the second time, and not in 1 week or 2 days or anything, but check it out. So oh yeah, I got a few things here. I got this. This is Rolling Stone put this out, a special edition on the Grateful Dead, and I don't know if they were very complimentary during the Grateful Dead, especially in the 60s and the 70s, but somehow the Rolling Stone magazine always comes around, and they put out this, which is a really nice. There's lots of pictures and articles on Jerry Garcia and the Dead. And I also picked up this book at a used clothing store we have here, and they get books in, and this is called Garcia by the editors of Rolling Stone. So obviously somewhere along the line they flipped. They went with the masses and maybe they became Deadheads. I don't know. Anyways, so long.